again, it just tells the story of it's the evil and the ugliness of people's hearts these days is everywhere.
This is Franky Rose's Think Tank. Here's your host, Franky Rose.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Think Tank. So we are just waiting for the courtroom to open, and we've got a hearing, Idaho versus Bryan Kohberger. So what does Ann Taylor have up her sleeve today? I don't know about that woman, guys. Oh, Jazzy's saying good morning. Good to see you, Dandy, Pam, Mexie, Ruthie, Shauna. Thank you very much, Shauna. I appreciate that very much. So yeah, we're just waiting for courtroom to open up. I'm not sure what she's got up her sleeves this time, but she's thank you for that. So yeah, Ann Taylor's definitely got something up her sleeve. She always does. You know that woman, she literally hey Alvin. Yeah, we've got a little bit of a zoo. Well-loved zoo, but yeah, a zoo. Bulldog, very nice, very nice. We have a lab and a Rottie. And multiple other pets. So yeah, what are we going to hear from Ann Taylor? Like I said, she's always got something up her sleeve, that one. I don't personally like her techniques, but you know, it is what it is. She seems to be making a little bit of headway, I guess, for him, but I don't like him. I think he's guilty as sin. Morning, Dingo. Good to see you, friend. So, yeah. Now, one of my problems with Ann Taylor, it's actually not, this particular thing is not really, it shouldn't be an issue for me. But you look at what Bryan Kohberger is getting for counsel, and then you look at some of these other lawyers that are given to each of these different defenders when they're going for free counsel. Now, this guy has got probably one of the top lawyers that are in that area, if not the top lawyer. She literally stopped doing stuff through her own, I don't know if it's her own company or not, or if she was working for another company, but she was very, very highly paid. And she gave that all up and dropped all of her clients so she could work on the Kohberger case. Now, for me, I just think, okay, she wants her name out there. You know, same thing with that Casey Anthony case. Everybody thought she was guilty. She got that one lawyer that kicked butt, and all of a sudden Casey Anthony is getting off. So it's kind of a similar thing in my mind for Bryan Kohberger. The counsel that he's getting is nothing like the counsel that some of these other criminals, alleged criminals, are handed down. So she goes in there and she acts like she owns that courtroom. She doesn't. She seems to think that she's got the right to tell the judge the way things should go. You must do this or you have to do that. And it disturbs me. It bugs the shit out of me that this woman goes in there and tells the judge what to do. Now, that's up to the judge, how much she lets him push her around. Morning, Crispy. Hey, Keza. So, yeah, it's up to him how much he allows her to push her weight through that courtroom. He seems to be allowing it. I'm not sure why, but that's the way it seems to be what's happening in this particular case. He's still, I think we've only heard his voice briefly. He has said nothing. His alibi, I was driving around. What? Well, yeah, you had to have been driving around to get to that house. So give me a break. He lived the next town over. Oh my word. It was a busy day yesterday. It was like, yeah, a festival for sure. I think I streamed for something like 12 hours on the different cases yesterday. So yeah, it was busy. And then Dandy, she was kind enough to remind me of Kohberger this morning. So of course we've been following this since it happened. So we don't want to be missing any of these hearings. Now, as far as these hearings go and the camera, hey, good morning, Renata. Welcome back, friend. So where was I with this? I lost my train of thought, guys, because that's not common. Oh, happy birthday. Happy belated birthday. Very nice. You would be a very busy lady. You had lots to do. So yeah, Bryan Kohberger. There's very little doubt. I don't know how anybody could think that this man is innocent based on what we have heard up to date. We're not looking for a trial until I think they've got it set for July 2025. So there's a bit of time now between all these hearings and when he's going to take the stand. If it gets to that, I'm really surprised that this guy is pushing the envelope here. I know there's not a lot of DNA left and they took down that house, but they have got so much. They've got his phone activity. He's got his, as little as it is, his DNA is on that sheath that they found. He was allegedly following one of the girls. I think it was Maddie in my mind. He was following her around electronically and probably was going into the restaurant she worked in. He's a vegan and she worked in the only vegan restaurant in that whole area there. So Moscow's been taking, yeah, right, James? Good to see you, friend. Yeah, he had no furniture in his house, guys. Like nothing, including shower curtain. Nothing. Don't know where he was sleeping. Don't know what. Just really, really messed up. You know, I wish that they had kept that house up, but the town was really, really, well, the town or the school. I think it was more likely the school, the university, was pushing to have it taken down. They wanted to put a memorial park in there. Well, I'll have to take a look. I don't think I've seen the park yet. And I'm a little disappointed because although it would have been one hell of a they would have needed to be masked up in that house. I mean, it was a freaking mess. But you know what? It might have been worth it so that the jury could actually see the layout of this house. So we have plenty of videos, a very large playlist when it comes to this crime. So we've got there's virtual maps, the house that we've gone through. There's a lot of information in that playlist. Lizzie's singing a song. Jazzy is no. She's going to scream at me and she wants a cookie. Okay, so this judge is Judge John Judge. Hey, dingo. No, Jazzy. So he has been more than fair. And oh my word, he has been more than fair when it comes to this defense. And probably a little too fair in my mind. He's let Ann Taylor get away with stuff. I would have shut her down. But I don't know if he's wanting to let her get her way so that there's no chance for appeals. And I know right now, Ann Taylor, his lawyer, is in the process of trying to change the venue. She wants to go right out of the area, thinking that, there won't be so many people that know about what's happened here, basically. Well, I'm in Canada, and I've heard of this since day one. And the audience that we have, they're from all over the world. They've all heard of it. So I don't know that moving him to another town is going to make it any better for Bryan Kohberger. I don't see it. There's a trail. There is literally a trail, electronic trail that takes him to that house. He turns off his phone at a certain time, turns it back on at a certain time. We see his vehicle going around that house. He was stalking them like a cat does a mouse. And it seems just after they had ordered, Xana had ordered some food. Now, it seems to me that when Kohberger was making one of his last swipes around that house, that food was being delivered. I don't think so either, Ruthie. Yeah, I don't think it'll make a bit of difference. No. I know. Yeah, no. And maybe that's part of the reason why the judge is saying, we're good. We're good here. I've been working on this case it'll be 2 years this November. November 13th is when this happened. And it's everywhere. Everybody knows what this man has done, in my opinion. Moving this to another town, just like Ruthie said, it's not going to make a difference. In my personal opinion, I just don't see how it would. But she's determined. And the judge has been, like I said, he's been working on this since this first happened. And he is probably the best judge to be watching this trial. I mean, he knows this case down to the very tiniest little piece of information. So I don't know if Ann Taylor is going to be able to change his mind. I really don't. It's not going to make a difference. Everybody knows what happened. So yeah, check out that playlist. There is a ton of information in there if you're just new to this case. Yes. Yeah, plenty of circumstantial evidence, plus DNA, plus no furniture. Changing towns will not change that. And that's the thing. She pushes for whatever she wants. That would be the best. So the motive, I really think that he had a problem with rejection. I have a feeling that he may have approached one of these girls, in my mind, most likely Maddie, and he was shut down. And I think he's been shut down most of his life. So, yeah, no shower curtains. So I think it's basically, I don't know, would you call it like a rejection? His rejection, in my mind, from women is what has brought this on. I think he thought he was, or wanted to be, in his mind, good enough to be with, the popular group. And he was weird. He's a weird guy. Yeah. Socially awkward on the spectrum. Yep. You guys are going to have to help me here. What is that name when Okay, the guy that wrote that manuscript after he deleted people. Yeah, in his eyes, I think he felt like an outcast. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I mean, just you look at some of his history, and I mean, the guy's messed up. He was basically fired from this last university for, well, there's plenty of things. And it sounds like he wasn't being very fair to the girls that were in these courses. He was able to live on campus or right around campus because he was, I don't know if you'd call it like proctoring. He was working underneath one of the university's instructors. So they were allowing him a place to stay, and he was helping with these. Yes. He was helping with these different classes. Absolutely. Yes. Elliot Rogers. Yep. That's the guy. That's the guy. And he seemed to admire him in some way. He seemed to believe he was the same as him. On the inside, maybe not on the out, but on the inside, I think he felt like Elliot Rogers did. Now, Elliot Rogers wrote that manuscript, and it sounds like Kohberger totally took all of that information in and put himself in Elliot Rogers' shoes. That's what it seemed like to me. Very much. Very much. And he was weird. He's weird. I don't mean to be rude, but if he would go to the university in Moscow, to the lunchroom, and stare at the girls. Yeah, the manifesto. Manifesto, not manuscript, the manifesto. Thank you. So he would go to that lunchroom to a university he had no part of and sit there in that lunchroom and stare down girls. Like, just stare at them. Like, ugh. It is not the best setup, you guys. So we're waiting for the judge and Kohberger to come in. Okay, it's unavailable. That's why I'm having problems.
They come from where's he from?
Oh, it is. The judge decided to change things up, and it's no good. You don't get to see Kohberger, the expression on his faces. It's I don't like it. I don't like it one bit.
Oh, okay.
These usually don't last too long. I much prefer it when they use either Long Crime or whatever channel to be the main camera, and then we take it from them, because they're professionals. They know what they're doing. But at the very beginning of this, Ann Taylor and Kohberger, get this one, they complained about the camera, saying that they were focusing on Bryan Kohberger's crotch. That's what they said. Nobody cares about his junk. Look at the size of him.
All rise. Thank you very much. Please be seated.
He's a big
Good morning.
guy. Audio sucks, guys.
So let's get on the record, please. We're now on the record. This is State versus Bryan Kohberger, case number CR 29222805. Mr. Kohberger is in the courtroom. He is represented by Ms. Taylor, Mr. Logston, and Ms. Nassif. The state is represented by Mr. Thompson. Ms. Jennings, okay, I didn't see you immediately. Ms. Beatty and Mr. Nye. We're here on a motion to change venue from Latah County to Ada County, filed by the defense. Preliminary, anything, Mr. Thompson?
In your honor, not from the state.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Your honor, just that there is a stipulation that the court received the exhibits that were filed along with our declaration and our memorandum in support. That's correct, your honor.
All right, so we're talking about all those slides? There were like 100 slides.
There were 100 slides, your honor. We're talking about those, but in particular, the references to all of the media coverage, the articles that were contained, the table with the links to all of the articles that depict all of the media coverage.
So are you going to show those publicly, or those are for me because I'm the one who has to make the decision?
Those are for you. Yeah,
okay.
We'll have PowerPoint presentations today, but we will not be going through the hundreds of articles that have been provided for the court's consideration.
Well, I'm thankful for that because I did look through all that and I thought, oh, this would be not a good thing to, push out to the public because we're trying to protect that, right?
Your Honor, we are, and I think it would take an extraordinary amount of court time to try to read through all of the articles or review all of the bits of news coverage that have happened in this case. We do intend to offer a little bit of a preview throughout our testimony, but certainly not the hundreds of articles and news stories that have existed.
Well, that was my other concern. So, all right. Well, call your first witness.
Your Honor, Ms. Massa, we'll start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Your Honor, as we get started here today, what I'd like to do is provide you with a roadmap of where we're going with our witnesses. The standard here is whether there's a reasonable likelihood that pretrial publicity has affected the impartiality of prospective jurors. To establish the quantity of pretrial publicity, we will call James Todd Murphy with true scope. To establish effect on partiality, we will call Dr. L. Alili to discuss the social science behind juror decision-making. Then we will call Dr. Bryan Edelman about the survey and what it means. And finally, we will call Dr. Dare about the validity of the survey methodology. We are not calling today Scott Sunby, but as you listen to testimony today, please keep his sworn affidavit in mind. With his 39 years of studying capital juries and teaching at the National Judicial College, he is considered by the United States Supreme Court an expert in this area. He has published this book. It's called A Life and Death Decision, A Jury Weighs the Death Penalty. And this book is a culmination of interviews of over 1,200 capital jurors and how capital juries make decisions. Research shows that when a small community creates pressure to impose death, an Eighth Amendment violation may occur. Through these witnesses today, we want to avoid beginning a trial with, as Mr. Sunby states, quote, a thumb on death's side of the scale, end quote. And with that, I call James Todd Murphy.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Mr. Murphy, come on up.
They're try every other person with the same amount of
find your way
public awareness. Just should have,
and
guys.
please face the clerk, raise your hand.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury.
I do. All right. Thank you, sir. Please have a seat there. And once you're seated, please state your name and spell your last.
James Todd Murphy. I go by Todd, my middle name. Last name is Murphy.
All right. Sir, Ethan Chapin.
Mr. Murphy, how are you employed?
I'm the president of TrueScope. That's spelled TRUESCOPE. It's one word.
And can you explain what TrueScope is?
Sure. TrueScope is a media monitoring and analysis service. We wrap our arms around all the media types out there. You can do it on a global level or a geographically isolated level. Normalize all that data from television, radio, newspapers, magazines, social media, online sources. Index that with metadata so we know date, time, placement. We assign sentiment metrics to it. And from that, we can extract data sets for what our clients need, specific to topics or phrases.
Can you explain how you track this media intelligence that you just described?
Sure. So we have feeds that are coming in. For example, we acquire a feed from X, formerly Twitter. We have an online feed that accesses all available online sources. We have a broadcast feed of TV, radio, and podcasts. All those feeds come into us as they're broadcasted, as they're posted, as they air or are printed. We don't do any modification of the text or the context. We just take it as it was provided by the content owner, index, store, and then run queries against it.
Where did you travel from to be with us here today?
Our North America headquarters are in Omaha, Nebraska, where I live.
Would you tell the court about your background in media intelligence?
Sure. Might sound cliche, but I was born into the business. My father acquired press clipping service called Universal Press Clipping Bureau in 1959. Eventually met my mother. Without further detail, eventually I became in existence. It's a technical phrase, I'm not sure. So working alongside my father growing up was just part of the DNA. I studied psychology and communications in college, and when I graduated, the internet was beginning to become a thing. And so I saw a future of data mining and expanding what was a press clipping service into the future. So my full-time employment with Universal at the time started in 1991 and came to today.
Beyond your 30 years of experience that you've described in your educational background, do you have other qualifications in this area?
Yes. So in the mid-90s, I developed a framework for comparative media analysis where we could take those data sets and compare. My first project was letting hospitals compare themselves to others to see how one brand of a hospital might compare to another within a community or market. I also invented the first multi-channel media monitoring software that would let us monitor multiple TV channels on one computer and write the closed captioning text to a database simultaneously. Innovations not quite as exciting as those continued throughout the years. I also made other acquisitions, which I then folded into Universal, buying up other monitoring services in Alaska or Wisconsin or wherever. Eventually merged my company with TrueScope. TrueScope, a technology company out of Australia. TrueScope owns Universal Information Services at this point, and we're adding AI and other natural language processing to what we do.
What about organizations? Are you part of any organizations in this field?
I am. There's a global organization of all media intelligence services called FIBEP. That's spelled F-I-B as in boy, E-P as in Paul. Every continent except the uninhabited ones have many, often multiple media intelligence or media monitoring services. they belong, or most belong to this organization. My peers in this organization elected me president to lead this organization at a global level last year. I'm currently the president of CEDA.
And have you ever testified related to your expertise before?
I have been asked to do that, yes.
Before you start talking about the data in this case, how closely have you followed this case on a factual level?
I kind of have a personal standard operating procedure that when a client engages us on a topic that I feel for our company may become contentious or may have downstream effects where I might be called to objectively testify, I purposely remove myself from evaluating the content of the data set related to the subjects that are asking us to monitor. So while I have made myself familiar with the search strategy, the keywords, the phrases, which would include the defendant's name and the family names of the students that are victims, I have done very little. I paid very little attention to the media exposure on this. In fact, I just learned that the judge of this case has a last name that sounds like he was born for this role. That was last night. I didn't know who the judge was. Coincidence. My apologies for not knowing who you were until last night. Thank you.
Are you familiar with Ms. Saucier, who testified last year in this case?
Yes, Jean Saucier is my right-hand person. She's a senior vice president of client success. She has a media measurement background that started years before she came to be under my appointment. I would venture to say she's as much of an expert in this area as I am. And if she was actually here, I'd probably say she's more of an expert, but since she's not, I'll say that for myself.
So for context purposes, when she testified about data in TrueScope, is it the same set of data that you've just testified to?
Exact same data. We work at the same company. We have access to the exact tools. She works with clients directly as yourself, and I work directly with her.
How is TrueScope using media intelligence in this case?
I'll say it maybe functionally. We have been asked by you, our client, to track specific topics related to this case, names associated, and I might say the more unique a phrase is, the more accurate our media monitoring can be. If the name was John Smith and Susan Jones, then we have to do much more Boolean logic, apply more Boolean logic to make sure that we're focused on extracting it's very specific. So for you, we've built a search query using Boolean logic and AI to focus on the stories that are of interest in this case. The second half of what we're doing, so that's the media monitoring. We first capture the data. That creates a data set. Then that data set is analyzed by our analysis team, which is led by Cheryl Lewis, Theril, Lewis, Lewis. And she has an assistant data analyst who they're trained in a way that we call cross-coder proficiency. So whether Cheryl analyzes a story or Harry, her assistant data analyzer, they analyze it in the same manner. That also creates a check and balance that if something in the media monitoring function picks up a story that matches the name Judge, but for some reason isn't the Judge associated with this case, the analyst then at a human level can say, that's the wrong Judge, and it would be removed from the data set at the analysis level.
What objectives is TrueScope trying to achieve in this case?
We've been primarily asked to look at the without even being hyperbolic, would say an extreme amount of media coverage, its impact on a population or a community, and the statistical volume of that media exposure on various communities across the U.S., but focused on several counties within Idaho.
How long has TrueScope been gathering data? for Mr. Kohberger's case?
I believe we were engaged on February 15th, 2023. We have some ability to pull some data forward from that time, but that's when technically the engagement came.
And you talked about the media types and the data that's gathered. Is area or location of media coverage able to be determined?
Yes, in most cases, maybe I'll separate that into two areas of media. You have traditional media, which would be television, radio, newspapers, magazines, even online news sources. Those are all tied to a specific city and state. You have the Moscow Daily News, and the metadata that we have attached to that source would say, okay, that publication name is in the city of Moscow, in the state of Idaho, and has a circulation figure of, I'll say, hypothetically 3,000 readers. I don't know the exact circulation of that specific paper. For television, each television news affiliate, local news comes from what's called a local news affiliate. It may be the ABC affiliate, but it may have call letters such as KXLY, I think is one of the Spokane channels. And they may be an NBC or an ABC affiliate, but they're the local affiliates who's in charge of airing local news. And Nielsen media data, Nielsen services, you may have heard of Nielsen boxes and market ranks and things like that. They know that that station is in this city, in this state, and each affiliate is part of a DMA, a designated market area. Stop me if I'm going too far down the rabbit hole, but a designated market area, although the news may come out of Spokane, Washington, the designated market area is a radius around that can take in additional cities, counties, and at the functional level, consumers of news, viewers in this case.
Is frequency of media coverage able to be determined?
Yeah, we, since on television, newspapers, online, demographics can change over time, can change by day. So a good example of frequency, why frequency matters, a local news affiliate might have a 6 to 7 a.m. newscast, a midday newscast, a 5 p.m. and a 10 p.m. Depending on what time zone you're in, those can be adjusted based on network. But let's say that they ran a story about anything. They might have run it in the morning where the demographics skew one way. They might run it at midday, which might have a much smaller audience or potential viewership. They might run it at 5 o'clock, which would have people who come home from work early or those who are unemployed. And then at 10 o'clock generally can be the largest audience. So knowing what time they run it lets us know the demographics, the audience, and even a vanity metric called ad values.
That was weird.
We won't get into that, but what time a story airs and how many times it runs, we aggregate that and we can say, okay, this story ran 4 times on this channel on one day and had a total viewership potential of, say, 50,000. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean I watched it at all 4 times. That just means the viewership at each of those times has the potential to see it. And that's where frequency comes into play.
Are there types of media coverage that Truth Scope does not gather?
We don't track anything that's illegal. We don't go behind, we don't penetrate privacy rules, such as your personal Facebook pages if they're marked private. We also don't look at streaming entertainment channels such as Peacock, Hulu, where the content on those channels often is broadcast originally in a specific time zone. We call that an ephemeral broadcast, where it aired at 5 o'clock and then was lost to the ether. But Hulu and those streaming channels,
in my personal opinion, this should not be an issue. Kohberger should never have done what he did if he didn't want a lot of people interested in what's going on with his case. He brought this on. He did this.
Give the opportunity for that story then to be posted, and you can watch it at your leisure in a time shifter. We don't monitor those adjacent streaming channels, because they're subscription based, demographics are different, and we already have the content as it was aired originally.
I'm going to hand you what's been stipulated and admitted as a part of Exhibit C. I've shown the state, Your Honor.
Thank you.
I feel bad for the state. I do.
Can you
guys
tell
are throwing all
the
sorts of
court
shit
what that is?
That is a very base level spreadsheet of all the media exposure, just looking at some of the topics specific to this account that you've engaged us for, including the topics that you've specified we monitor for your account. It includes various things like the type of media, so it might be Twitter or print or broadcast. It would include the metadata we include, city, state, circulation, viewership, things like that. There's also hyperlinks. As a client of ours, you would receive, if you exported this from your workspace or we exported it for you, you would have a hyperlink. You would click on that. Because we have a cookie on your computer, it would open that hyperlink and you could see the full story. Unless it's an online story or a social media story, then we take you directly to that end source. So if it's MoscowDailyNews.com and it's in front of their paywall, you would click on that link and you can view that story yourself.
Is Exhibit C in front of you specific to Latah County?
Yes, I see under county, spot checking it and spinning through where it can be determined. These are all Latah County related. Some of them are cities within Latah County.
Is the list of Exhibit C approximately 1,360 entries long?
Yes, I can confirm that's the number of rows, which and each row would indicate a individual media mention, or also known as a media story, an article or a news story on a broadcast.
And Your Honor, I won't have him hand that to you now, but for purposes of the record, that will be a paper copy for the court's file. You have that in an Excel spreadsheet that's much easier to read than what is in that paper in there.
Right. Okay. So this was agreed by the state too. So I just want to make sure, because I have the exhibit C also that was attached to your brief,
Which is
300 pages. So, but then we have the additional C, which is more, I guess, thorough.
So this is a part of C related to TrueScope, which is this list of the 1,300 stories. And then I'm about to get into the other part of Exhibit C, which is TrueScope's report.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Just wanted to clear that up.
Did you prepare some other documents that represent media coverage in 4 counties in Idaho for this case?
We did. Once TrueScope had and it's an ongoing thing. We're constantly monitoring your news. So even this morning, you would have received a report of any media exposure that has happened since yesterday morning. It runs on a 24-hour cycle where we push out a report to the clients, but we're collecting it in real time. So if a client wanted to look at their workspace at 3 p.m. today, all that news would be in there. I may have digressed from your question.
That's coming to hand you an exhibit.
Okay.
This is the second part of C, and I'm going to put that in front of you because it might be easier to see. You've got 2 screens.
Yes, that was the second part of my answer. We did prepare a media measurement analysis.
Me
showing
either.
this team and-
Just what?
and, that's
Can you imagine a jury listening
part
to
of the
that?
combination of services that we're providing.
Okay, looking at this page here, can you please explain to the court what this is?
Sure. You have two pie charts. On the left, you have the volume of media coverage specific to the keywords and phrases searched for our client related to this case. You see on the left, out of all the media coverage between January 2023 and July 15th, 36% of that coverage, or just over 36% of that, was seen or had the opportunity to be seen in Latah County. On the right side, you have another pie chart that shows the population of Idaho, and it shows what percentage Latah County represents of the total percentage of Idaho, which is 2.75%.
On the second bullet point of notes there's some reference to census. Can you explain
Yes.
that
What?
note?
Sure. The census data used for this was from, I believe, July of 23. Of the 40,924 people in the county, we were asked to look at age eligible to serve on jury duty amongst all of that, the people in the county, which equated to 61%, or just under 25,000 people of the nearly 41,000 all are age eligible to serve on the jury.
So that means there's a lot of
Right.
people still available.
Going to the
that
next
area.
page. What does this page tell the court?
This is the same analysis framework performed on a different county. Again, on the left, you see the total media coverage in Idaho for the same date range, but 34% of the media coverage was seen in Ada County, which is just a couple percentage points below that of Latah County. The primary difference is the right-hand pie chart, which shows the population of Ada County relative to all of Idaho, and it's over a quarter of the state population, so Ada, or 26.42%.
What conclusions do you draw when you compare the two counties' data?
There's a lot more people in Ada County, and where I would be going with that as a media analysis, when I would interpret this from a media analysis perspective, is the propensity to dilute the media exposure in a larger population is a factual function of that. If you have a certain number of stories divided by the population, the number of stories a person can see is fewer if the population is larger. Did that answer your question? Or
I'll follow up with another specific one. Out of the two counties, where is the most opportunity for a resident to view stories about this case?
It's by far in Ada County. When we did the analysis of the age eligible process, nearly 300,000 people in Ada County are jury age eligible, compared to just under 25,000 in Latah County.
I'm gonna just ask my question again. It was probably inartful on my part. Do more people in Latah County, is there more saturation in Latah County or more saturation with media coverage in Ada County?
Yes. A person in Latah County would be exposed to far more media coverage than people, a community in Ada County.
Can we now switch to the third slide? What does this show?
This adds in 2 additional counties that we were asked to look at. It reflects media exposure specific to Bannock and Camden counties.
And and then there's also a gray area, rest of Idaho. You just want to explain what we see here?
Sure. So if you look at the volume of media coverage for the same date range that the first 2, Latah, Ada, and then 4 counties we're looking at. Out of all the media exposure for the state of Idaho, Latah received 36%, Ada had 27%, Bannock 1.56%, and Canyon just over 3%. And the rest of Idaho got just under a third of the meetings. So outside those 4 counties, the rest of the counties in Idaho, for the rest of the people that the rest of the regions in Idaho would have been exposed to approximately 31.5% of the media exposure.
If you turn
That leaves a lot
next
of
to,
people.
I believe it's page 5.
Good question. Very good question.
Explain what opportunities to be seen are and the differences in the counties.
Sure. So in this pie chart, again, we're looking at the same date range. Opportunities to be seen
Exactly.
are maybe best described relative to probability versus possibility. Each person in any of these 4 counties, or the rest of Idaho for that matter, have an equal possibility to see a story. It's like flipping a coin. You can flip a coin 100 times and the possibility of it coming up heads is equal every time. The probability of it coming up heads every time is much different. Probability is a mathematical statement, a quantitative measure. And so opportunities to be seen are dependent on the media type. So we measure opportunities to be seen for, say, newspapers based on their circulation. These are paid subscribers who you then infer pay to receive that news, they consume that news. Television has Nielsen audience figures. Nielsen measures those in smaller markets quarterly, in larger markets 6 times a year, I believe. Any of the broadcast markets we're talking about and the DMAs affecting this pie chart would be measured quarterly.
Good Lord.
So opportunities to be seen are the possibility that people in that county would see it. It's the volume of those opportunities that creates the potential opportunity or probability that they've been exposed to X number of
Lordy, guys.
articles or media mentions, discrete articles, stories about this topic you're having us track. The numbers reflected on the pie chart show that over half of those opportunities to be seen reside within Latah County, nearly 60% or 57.03%. The opportunities to be seen per person in Ada County is 31.2%, not quite half, but nearly half the opportunities. And that's a simple mathematical function of all the media exposure in that county divided by the population, or in this case, potentially age eligible for jury population.
And in terms of the green sliver there, Canyon County is close to Ada. And so if we assume that Canyon County residents might review Ada County news with its population of 180,000, is the dilution of Latah County or the dilution of Canyon County still significantly greater than the saturation in Latah County?
If I understand the question correctly, how I may answer that is Canyon, and I would also say Bannock, unless you don't want me to mention Bannock, but the media exposure specific to those counties is statistically insignificant relative to the rest of Idaho, Latah County, Ada County. In fact, if you combined all those two and group them into either one of those, it would change the inferences that we make on the data between Ada and Latah.
Can you turn to the next slide now?
I think he can.
tell the
I
court
think you
which
can.
line represents which county and the color.
Sure, the
Let
darker
them push
line,
all over the place.
the red line is maybe the easier one to see. That's Ada County, and the darker line, it's a blue or might look black on the screen, is Lake County.
And for Judge, for your purposes, this is C1 that was filed with the reply, which is an update from the original memorandum to include a more recent date, the date that we filed, August 19th, the reply. So I don't know what one you're looking at, but the one on your computer screen is the one that we're talking about right now.
Thank you.
Why are we not getting the accurate
Could
one?
you explain, Mr. Murphy, what the purpose of showing this over time does for the court?
Yeah, one of the more interesting charts that we develop for our clients is media coverage over time. And in this case, we're looking at January 1st of 23 through August 19th of 24. If you look at the red line, which is Ada County, you can see that aside from May 2023, it often lags by volume of coverage behind Latah County, in most cases by 50% or more of the media coverage. So if I rephrase that in maybe simpler terms, the media exposure in Ada County for the majority of time between January 2023 and August, continuing into August 2024, has been far less in Ada County than in Utah County.
And what can you tell from the spikes? Have you correlated those with case events?
Sure. It might be convenient to look at it analogous to maybe a stock portfolio. Oftentimes a peak is followed by a valley, unless you invest in NVIDIA. But
Those are big valleys.
May 2023, you see 198 stories. I believe that highest peak for Ada County was the indictment is what's driving that peak. Now, when you compare that to Latah County, I can see that moving towards that indictment, there was ongoing media coverage. So while Ada spiked, it had a quick uptick in what I would call a fairly slow decay because of the extreme nature of the topic of this story. When we look at Latah County, it is more consistent. And after the indictment, Latah County surpasses media coverage over time consistently up through August of this year.
And this was filed with the court on August 19th, and we're here on August 29th. Have you been able to review and see what's going on with the coverage regarding this case right now as we sit here?
Yeah, I took a look Tuesday. I started seeing the media exposure ticking up again. It was fairly high yesterday. In my professional opinion, I would wager it's going to be extremely high today. And that's a function of public interest in an extreme news story.
There's others.
A story, you may have heard the phrase, this story has legs. A story that is extreme, unique, atypical, has greater legs than, say, high school football scores you hear on the 10 o'clock news on a Friday night. Those would have a very fast decay of memory on consuming viewers. This type of story will remain on the mind and be of interest up to and beyond the conclusion of this case, however that might be.
What about
Could you
Delphi?
flip to the next slide? This green line, what does it show?
It shows somewhat of a similar pattern across the entire country. It's the same date range. It's also showing media coverage over time, but it's looking at all media exposure nationwide. So while you feel things very acutely locally, even a story as extreme as this garners less interest the further you get away from the
So how do
local
they account
community,
for social media?
and to look at this on a nationwide chart like this, you can see it remains in the mind, and these are large numbers. The indictment of over 13,268 or 13,268 media mentions on May 2023 shows that the nation was interested in it, but that decay has been faster on a nationwide level, just because according to the decay of engagement on news stories, the further you get away, the less, I don't mean to sound callous, but the less interesting it is if you're in Florida than if you are in Latah County or something.
So in terms of looking at decay, I want to ask this in the context of the story waning for the court's purposes of projecting, say, months down the line next year at trial. Based on the data that you're seeing, is this story waning in the news?
No. In fact, if we could make one more line on any of these media coverage over time charts, you would see an upslope on the first one, this
That's
chart.
what I think.
So you already see it
Well said.
ticking up when I compared Latah to Ada. If we could bring that chart forward to today, you would see
Well
that
said.
going up, and that will be consistent anytime this case has significant news or a significant hearing in Latah and Idaho County. It will be of interest, and I would say that the delta or the difference between Latah and Idaho County will continue to be statistically similar. It will probably potentially always be of greater interest in Latah County than in Idaho County.
What do you want?
Not to diminish
Go to a
the
little
interest in Idaho County. It's
community in the
just,
middle of
I
nowhere?
believe it's further away than Latah County from where the alleged crime would occur.
If
Well,
there's
the
internet,
crimes.
people know.
Is Nez Perce and Lewiston are they a part of Latah County's designated market area?
To my knowledge, yes.
What does that mean for Lewiston and Nez Perce to be a part of the designated market area of Latah?
That's real simple. If the population, another county or cities?
Nez Perce is a county, Lewiston is a city.
Okay. So the population of those, I guess, could you rephrase the question?
What does it mean for those, for Nez Perce County and Lewiston City to be a part of the Latah County designated market area?
Okay, so that would increase the population of people that have opportunities to see the story within the same designated market area. So if you're in Latah County, you have the same potential to see the stories in Nez Perce and Lewiston. Does that change the mathematical outcome of the original pie charts we looked at? Those two counties combined with Latah County would have to exceed the population of Ada County in order for this dynamic to change. I don't know how many people are exactly in each of those counties, but if together with Latah County, they exceed 295,000 potential jury eligible jurors, then you might be able to say the impact from the media on those two populations or exposure to media could be equal. But if Nez Perce and Lewiston are smaller counties and together with Latah are still significantly lower than Ada County, that's not going to change the determination I've made in this data.
I have no further questions.
Thank you. So, Ms. Beatty, you're.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Just briefly, Your Honor.
That guy was mind numbing.
Good morning, sir.
How does he
Just for my own
social
clarification,
media?
on those pie charts, when it says Latah County and Ada County,
Are you limiting that to the boundaries of the specific county, or are you talking about the broader designated market area?
When what we're looking at is media mentioned that impacted the county.
The county specifically?
Right, so.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So in looking at those line graphs that you presented, I noticed that they started in January of 2023.
Correct.
So December of 2022, Mr. Kohberger was arrested. Were you able to make any determinations of media coverage in December of 2022 at the time Mr. Kohberger was arrested?
We were not engaged nor tracking the media.
Okay. And that's not possible to go back and track that?
We can do what's called a back search, but we can't. Certain media types have expired. Online news links, social media might have been taken down. So you can do it. I wouldn't say I would present it with confidence.
Thank you.
I can show you a number.
Thank you. So fair to say, though, that there probably would have been a pretty substantial spike at that time as well.
I would say yes.
And possibly, although you can't say for sure, that spike could have been even higher than any of the other spikes on this graph, possibly.
The possibility exists.
Thank you, sir. So for the first 6 months on this chart of volume of media coverage over time for Latah and Ada County had more intense media coverage in January, February, March, April, May, and then June, and then in July, there's that crossover where Latah County is higher than Ada County. So fair to say for that first 6 months, Ada County did have, at times, fairly significantly more media coverage than Latah County.
Correct.
Okay. And council talked with you about these peaks and how they correspond with specific events in the case, such as court hearings. Would you expect that if the court were to make a decision to start closing certain hearings, particularly evidentiary hearings as we approach trial, that would be a mitigating factor that would decrease the amount of media coverage in this case?
I can't say yes or no on that. I would say it depends. If those closed meetings were a public record, then the media most likely that's following this would still have a high probability of reporting on it. They may just not have any image or interviews or some of the elements that go into a more engaging news story.
So the coverage might be less intense.
Intense is a qualification that I'm not able to make. I can't tell you how intense something impacts you as a viewer or a consumer.
Sure, thank you.
Oh, yes. Oh.
And I noticed in that chart of Latah County and Ada County coverage that in the last couple months, that coverage intensity in both of those counties has become pretty close again. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yes.
And so based on these charts, it's really not beyond the realm of possibility that Ada County could again surpass Latah County in coverage, at least at certain points, correct?
She's pretty bad.
Again, there's an equal chance of possibility. The probability based on the data, I would say is no, in my professional opinion. We've already seen an uptick, and it appears that in Ada County, the news is much more focused and attentive even to what I might consider a less weighted story. I think there was a story recently about a memorial garden or something that this county garnered quite a bit of media exposure. But that's logical. Sure.
Well, in June of 2024, it looks like they got so close that they were just 2 points apart. Is that correct? Latah County just 2 points above?
Yeah.
And you're not willing to testify that there's a possibility that Ada County could potentially surpass Latah County in the future?
I'll absolutely guarantee that possibilities are always equally available.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Beatty. Ms. Matthew?
Mr. Murphy, in terms of this discussion on Ada versus Latah, you mentioned the Nielsen rankings. Could you please tell the court the difference between what the Nielsen ranking is, and then I'll follow up with what Latah's is, what Ada County's is. So what's a Nielsen ranking?
Sure. So I don't want to assume that most people have heard of the Nielsen ratings, but anyone who's involved with selling advertising or the news media knows that Nielsen for more than 50 years has measured the top 200 designated market areas. New York City is number one. It's the largest DMA. The media in that market reaches the most people. And so it's a measure of how many active news consumers, is the way I would describe it, are in a city or a city's area. I know we're looking at counties, but your designated market area here in Latah County fall under the radius, I think I mentioned earlier, Spokane, Washington. In Ada County, their designated market area is Boise, Idaho. A different deal.
And what's the Nielsen ranking of Latah County?
It's ranked 64 out of 210.
And what is Boise?
97.
I have nothing. So I should follow up and say, in terms of how that's measured, 64 mean that is a higher rank than Boise at 97.
The DMA in which Latah County resides has far more opportunities for media stories to be seen based on the strength of the DMA. As you get down to the smaller DMAs, for example, Glendive, Montana, has historically been market 210 last. They have one CBS affiliate. There's just not a lot of news coming out of that area, a DMA like Glendive. But on the two counties you're talking about, they reside in a DMA that's 64 for Latah County. A larger DMA is going to have more media opportunities to be seen and more media outlets available. As you get to smaller markets, you have fewer and fewer media outlets serving there.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Beatty?
Nothing from the state, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, may this witness be excused?
He can, Your Honor, and the exhibits that are with him can go for you for the court's paper file for the record.
Thank you. Okay, sir, you're free to leave.
I think he
or
knows
you're
that.
free to stay. Thank you. Appreciate it. You being here. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, it looks like the judge has got lots of reading. 300 pages.
These are very small letters.
I agree, Your Honor. It was really hard to get them on one page. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Why don't we take a quick break and maybe come back at 10:20. Okay. Thank you.
So pretty brief. Yeah, Ann Taylor and her co-counsel, they go very aggressively towards this judge. Latah County, they are a lot more laid back. Ann Taylor just seems to push her way through everybody. I don't like her. I mean, is she doing good for her criminal? Probably. Probably is. But I don't know. I think the judge needs to get some kahunas and not let her push him like she does. It doesn't look good for the court when this happens. So this break should only be, I believe, about 10 minutes. I'll do that for now. Yeah, this is the thing. this is the thing. You know, I think the judge, she does. Yeah. I think the judge needs to stand up to her more. I don't like the way they push that courtroom around. Again, it's probably good for him, but he needs to put her in her place, in my opinion. I don't like the way she says the court should do this or the court has to do that. And I mean, we've got many other high profile cases, and you don't see this kind of ish with them. I mean, we've dealt with what we consider some pretty crappy judges. You know, Bev comes to mind. Shithawk and Delphi comes to mind. But this guy seems like he cares. He's just not standing up to her. I don't quite understand that. Unless it's like we were talking earlier, he's letting her get everything out that she possibly can so that there is not any type of appeal based on anything she finds as harmful to Kohberger, possibly. You know, I go back to the Delphi case, or let's look at Karen Reed. I mean, if any case should have been moved, I would say that would be the one. There is a lot of BS that went on in that trial. Obviously, with all of the information, it wasn't enough for the jury because they were hung. So they're not moving that trial. Bev is still going to be the judge in January. Lolly is still going to be the prosecutor in January. You don't see the defense saying, listen, we got to bring in this expert because this pie chart tells you this. It's I don't think it's going to help her criminal. I don't think Kohberger is going to get any advantage by moving this trial anywhere. Like Crispy says, like, she's way on the other side of the planet. Yeah. And Christy knows about it. Yeah, Delphi, look at that mess. I mean, that's another case. If one should be moved, it would be Delphi. But that judge, she refuses. So there he sits. Well, with that case, at least Richard Allen finally got out of an actual prison and is back in jail. You know, they had that guy in a prison for a couple of years. Explain that. Kohberger comes in dressed to the frickin' nines, doesn't say a word, just sits there all arrogant. And for a guy that hates women, these women are fighting for him, you know? I just think he's getting too much rope. Will he with himself with it? I hope so. I hope these two women, with all of their pushing and aggressive natures, I hope that they realize that they're getting a lot of rope. And a lot of people end up with that rope. You know? It blows me away. Ann Taylor was not she left her practice to come do this case here with Kohberger. She dropped all of her clients and jumped onto this. So as far as I'm concerned, she's doing everything she can to keep her own face and name out there. And that goes with her little cohort there too. They're getting paid a lot of money. A lot of money. Not what the average court-appointed lawyer makes. I do believe that's what it is. It's for herself. You know, she's pushing the envelope. She doesn't mind running down the state. She will accuse them of some pretty ignorant-ish. And the judge will just go, what? No. And you don't see the state playing all these games. I don't even know if they're used to playing all these games. Have they encountered anybody like Ann Taylor before? I almost think they haven't. I just hope they're not outgunned. I hope that they will be able to stand their ground with her through everything that she's doing. Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, very much so. Very much so. She will tell him, this is the way it should be. She doesn't ask, she tells. And I think that's disgusting. She's not showing the respect for the judge that she should. You know, like, where's her respect for her superior? No, it's not. Not professional at all. You know, there is a certain way in a courtroom everybody is supposed to behave across the board. And she is, like you say, she's not being professional. She's being aggressive. She's being pushy. She puts out a theory that, I mean, like a defense counselor should, I suppose, all these alternate theories. Well, none of it washes. We got his car on film. We have his DNA there. She has. Yes. Yeah, they do. No, me either. No. And in some hearings, it's been worse. I mean, we'll see how she goes. It looks like she brought a laptop or something up with her. Okay, I'll just put this up because they... She is just a piece of work. Is that what you can say? She's a piece of work. She has zero respect. She pushes her way through like a bull. And she doesn't make her client, she's trying to make him not accountable for what has happened. Which again is what a good defense lawyer is supposed to do. But she goes over and above what should be done in a courtroom. She goes too far. You know, look at the way he's dressed, guys. Look at the way he's dressed. He has no money. His parents have no money. So please do explain. How is he dressed like this? It looks fitted. And then you look at, you know, I've still got a picture somewhere in here, and I'll show you. His lawyers are dressing him like that. And this here, it's disgusting. This here is how Richard Allen looked after he was incarcerated for a while. The stuff that this guy, I mean, he broke. Mentally, he broke. And you can see it. And Kohberger dresses like that. Yeah, that's my understanding, is that it was going to be extremely brief. And that's my understanding. Yeah, so we'll wait and see, but I think that's It was going to be brief, so I don't think it's much longer than a few more minutes. I think he just wanted everybody up to stretch their legs, and then we're going to hear from Ann Taylor again. Jeez. So yeah, we go from one inmate being treated like that, or one fellow that's charged looking like that. Then we got Kohberger. No. Here, this is what these cases. Oh, he was crispy. He was a complete mess. I mean, somehow they allowed him to go to court looking like that. I imagine his lawyers might have even said, listen, no, you can come to court. They probably wanted to see how he was being treated. Oh, that sounds so yummy, Elvin. Apple Snickers salad with Rolos. No, she basically picked him. When they were looking for lawyers, she spoke up and said, I want it. And she got it. I know, sounds yummy, doesn't it? Looking it up. Apple Rolos salad. Oh, did you find it, Mexi? Please share with us, Alvin. No, give me 2 seconds here. Yeah. Yeah, she's a DP attorney. But you know what? There is other ones in the state. Yeah, it just blows me away. Delphi in Indiana treats their inmates one way, and obviously Idaho decided to treat Kohberger like he's got a golden spoon, not even a silver spoon. Sounds good. I think I'll be looking it up too. Ruthie. Oh, yeah, I think you've got all of us Googling it. So, yes, Dandy's 100% right. She is DP qualified attorney. Yes. Yeah. I guess we have to say allegedly, but I do believe that I'm 99.9% sure this guy's guilty. There's nothing that even through all this that his lawyers have brought up that I'm like, oh, there's been nothing. They have nothing. I think they said at one point they might have a witness of where he was that night. But I tell you what, in my personal opinion, if they're able to pull that out of a rabbit's butt, it won't be legitimate because he was there. He did this, in my opinion. So she can, in my opinion, she can go on and on and on. I don't think it's proper at all, but she can go on and on and on. I don't think she'll be able to change the outcome. You know, we've looked at all the documents. We've got that behind us. Yes, exactly. Even with the evidence we are unaware of, I think he's the guy. That's it. That's it. And you know there's going to be a lot more. Even we hear from Kaylee Goncalves. We hear from her family quite often. And they do say that there's more information out there. They're having a hard time holding back from sharing it, and I don't blame them. But yeah, I'm like Dandy. Ooh, toasted slivered almonds in it. Look at you guys. Where do you guys go? Send some to Franky. I don't think it'll get across the border, but geez, I need to move. Anyone want to marry me? Bring me and my hubby and all of our zoo to the US so I can hang out with you guys. I would love, oh, here we go. What does this mean? Yes, exactly. A group meetup. I would love to do something along those lines. We've got a great
CR 2922-2805. Sorry for the delay. I think we had to adjust some mics. Make sure everybody can hear. And
here we go.
Council and Mr. Kohberger are here in the courtroom, so we're ready to go forward. Next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We will call Dr. Amani L. Alili.
All right, thank you.
Oh.
Thank you, ma'am. Please raise your right hand.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury.
It is.
All right, thank you. Please have a seat, and then please state your name and spell your name.
Her name's Amani Alili. Last name is EL-ALAYLI.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you. Good morning. I can see you brought some papers to the witness stand with you today. Will you identify what those are?
Yeah, it's just copies of the slides. It's nothing. It's not on my piece. I couldn't see.
Okay. And the slides, does that refer to the PowerPoint presentation that you for us to share today?
It's
okay. At this time, will you place that document in front of you face down? And if you have difficulty seeing the slides, let me know and we'll have you turn it over so you can track and help us understand what you're going to teach us today, okay?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, I want to make sure then the state has stipulated to admit that.
That's correct.
Slides. Okay, thank you. So all of the slides that we might be considering today, you agree to?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Will you tell us what you do for work?
I'm a professor at Eastern Washington University.
What do you teach?
I teach social psychology, which is the study of how people interact with each other and influence each other, how we're all affected by social situations.
I'm going to ask you some questions
Okay.
so that I can understand your background that led to your ability to teach. But I want to know if you're here today in your capacity as a professor or in your separate role as an expert consultant.
And here's my separate role as a consultant. So what I'll be talking about today is based on my expert opinion, based on the research I've conducted and what I've learned about in the field, and they're not affiliated with the university.
Thank you for that. Now let's go to your education. What degrees do you hold?
So I have a bachelor's in psychology, and I have a master's and PhD in social and personality psychology, with a focus on social psychology.
What does that mean, a focus on social psychology?
So our area, like I mentioned, it studies how we interact with and influence each other, the power of the situation and how it affects us, like how we're all behaving differently here than in our living rooms. It includes things like how people influence us to purchase things. Like I teach a class on social influence or influence us to donate money. And then my specific area of focus is on social cognition, which is how we select, remember, and interpret social information.
How long have you been teaching?
I have been teaching since before I graduated my PhD, so since the late 90s. But I started my positions as a professor in 2002.
2002?
2002 at University of Florida, 2003 at Eastern Washington University.
In your role as a professor and a professional, have you written articles and been published?
I have.
How many, roughly?
Roughly 15, give or take.
Do any of those relate to human bias?
Yes, most of them. So a lot of them are focused centrally on bias, and then many of the others are tangentially related to bias. So it could be biased perceptions of ourselves, how we tend to overestimate ourselves in a lot of ways. It includes biased impressions of individuals, like you might take one thing about a person and make a whole bunch of conclusions about them when you don't know them. And that could influence how you perceive their behavior later on. It includes biased perceptions of groups, so stereotyping and prejudice. And I've also studied biased impressions of businesses.
Have you consulted as an expert in other cases besides Mr. Kohberger's case?
Yes, I consulted in a case around 2016 or so, and then I was involved in the non-dissemination hearing here as well for Mr. Kohberger's case.
So you're telling us that you testified before Mr. Kohberger's case. Is that correct?
Correct.
And have you testified as an expert in any other hearings besides that one for Mr. Kohberger?
For Mr. Kohberger, no, just that one.
How about other people?
Yes, one for, in the case I didn't eke it out. I have a full-time job, plenty to do, but I've been asked to do expert testimony, and I feel like it's the right thing to do to share what I know about bias.
Thank you for that. What is your role today? What did we hire you to do and ask you to do?
So my role was to evaluate how publicity about a case could shape potential jurors when they come in and sit on a panel, and to see if maybe people who were living in Lake County or have some connection to Lake County might potentially have more problems being objective because of media saturation and other issues.
Did you prepare a PowerPoint to help walk through what you have to share today?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to do my best to open that up. I am trying to find the right.
You just go to slideshow, right to the top, maybe 6 down to the right. One more, right. And then on the left or to the front beginning.
Okay. I think we're there. Thank you for helping me through that.
I do this regularly. I'm teaching.
All right. I want to know if this is the background of the research on potential juror bias. What do you know about that?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of research on how publicity affects potential jurors. It says roughly 40 years. Really, it's been longer because in the 1960s, there were some high profile cases. And so social scientists wondered, does it matter if there's a lot of publicity about a case? Could that potentially make jurors, less objective, could that influence actual outcomes in a case? And so the research started then, kind of trickled in, and then became more and more popular. And then in 1999, there were enough studies that somebody conducted what's called a meta-analysis. And another one was conducted in 2022, so it's nice to have a recent one. A meta-analysis is when you take a bunch of studies on the same topic and you statistically combine them into one giant study. So they do this in every field. They do this in medicine, every discipline, where you really want to know an overall effect of something. Because I might run a study on the effects of pretrial publicity and find maybe a small effect, and somebody else might find a big effect, and somebody else might find no effect. And it's hard to trust any one study with, a few dozen participants, or even if it's hundreds. I would want to see lots of studies. Just like if I were trying to decide if I want to take a medication, I don't want just one study that tells me it works or doesn't work if I have a serious illness or the medication has serious risks. But I would be much more confident if there were a whole bunch of studies, dozens of studies combined, and thousands of participants' data. And so a meta-analysis basically does that. It narrows down a specific topic, in this case, the effects of pretrial publicity on judgments, and it examines overall, combined, is there an effect? And so there were, like I said, one is quite recent from 2022. So it's the simplest way to describe this research. It's the easiest way for somebody to know where it stands, even if they don't read all the articles. And what this work has found is that if somebody's exposed to publicity about a case, something about the defendant, something about the case, fact, fiction, that the tendency is, if you look at everything as a whole, for it to affect judgments, and specifically how much you like the defendant, your inclination to say that they're guilty, your judgments of their criminality, etc. And this has been shown with individual judgments of guilt, but even more so with group judgments, with juries. And it looks at participants who are randomly assigned to get pretrial publicity information or not, so that you can really determine cause effect. So this would be a formal experiment. We do lots of studies, and experiments are the ones that I like to look at, because what you do is you hold everything constant except for one thing that you change. You get one people, one experience, another group of people, another experience, and then expose them to all the same things. So all the same trial stimulus materials. And you see, okay, the people who got some information ahead of time that they weren't supposed to pay attention to, did they evaluate the evidence differently? Did they come up with different judgments? And so the meta-analysis in 2022 is based on over 11,000 total participants, and it summed up the studies on that specific topic.
And the sum up, what was the sum up?
Yeah, essentially what's on the slide there are the main findings. The fact that if you get exposed to publicity, you're more likely to render a judgment of guilt, and less likely to, or have lower liking for the defendant, and have higher ratings of their criminality.
Based on your years of teaching and work and understanding human bias, do you know why this happens?
Yes, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide, I have a couple sections here. One is on why we sort of soak up this pretrial publicity in the first place. And then the next section is on why that stays with us through a trial if we are to serve as jurors, even when we don't want it to stay with us. And so if I'm to start with the first topic, why is it that we soak this up in the first place? One reason is because of how we process information. Since the 80s, social psychologists have studied this model that suggests that it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes we think deeply about things and we scrutinize arguments and find flaws in them. And then sometimes we make quick decisions. We like decision shortcuts. And we only have so much cognitive capacity that the vast majority of our decisions and thought processes are more automatic. And we call this peripheral root processing when it involves an influence situation. So if you're making some kind of determination about something, whether you should purchase a certain car or vote for a certain political candidate or something like that, you can go through and you can analyze every single thing and try to be as objective as possible, or you can make a decision in 2 seconds. Oh, my neighbor has that car and they like it. And so the problem with peripheral processing is sometimes you're going to come to a conclusion that you wouldn't have come to before if you had thought about things more methodically, more systematically. And so the reason this applies here is because people, when they're consuming media, are often processing peripherally. Why? Because they might not be completely able to focus on a story, or they're scrolling quickly through a newsfeed. So if you're scrolling through a newsfeed or a social media feed, or if you're watching the news while you're cooking dinner or something like that, you're taking in information, but you're not able to really devote the resources cognitively to nitpick. And so you'll see something like Bryan Kohberger arrested for the murder of 4 students, or you'll see something like this: among items taken from suspect, knives, guns. And automatically, when we're processing at the superficial level, which again, most of the time we're doing, we'll say, oh, okay, so they found the person who committed the crime and they have evidence. And we don't take it a step further. But if you actually stop and think, then you realize, oh, wait a minute, people get arrested all the time and it turns out they didn't commit a crime. Or wait a minute, we all have knives in our homes, but we haven't all killed somebody. I have a lot of knives in my kitchen. A lot of households have guns. And so we don't take that extra step to really think deeply about things a lot of the time when we're consuming media.
That's why
It sounds like you're telling me that we're just absorbing information, and in Mr. Kohberger's case, from the media, people may take bits and pieces, and that starts to create a level of knowledge or human bias.
We might feel like we know about something more than we do, yeah.
We've read all.
Are there other ways that bias gets created?
Yes, and it looks like you advance to the next slide. So one thing that's relevant here too is listening to.
Okay, so as she's carrying on here, this is why they have a jury, to just hear the facts. Not everybody digs into cases like we do. Most people will go, oh, okay, and they leave it there. That's why when you get your jurors, you pick the ones that are not influenced. And in my personal beliefs, even based on that pie chart we just looked at, there are a lot of people in this area that have no idea about this crime.
Authority figures. So I mentioned that we're processing superficially a lot of the time, peripherally, and one readily available peripheral cue a lot of the time when it comes to this type of situation is hearing information from authority figures, people who have status or expertise, any kind of power, and we tend to listen more to people in those positions. And yes, a lot of the time they have more knowledge, but there are big problems with this. One is that we assume that they're accurate. We forget that they're humans too, that they make mistakes too, that they have biases too. Like if I'm in charge of trying to make a community feel safe by, arresting the right person for a crime, I have a motivation. I want to make sure, I want to convince myself maybe that, I've caught the right person. And, if I'm in that position, doesn't make me less biased, right? We all have biases. All humans have biases. And they also could be wrong. Like I said, people can get arrested for a crime when they didn't commit it. And what we found in research over many, many years, decades, is that if somebody has any kind of indicator of authority, even if it's something as minor as height, but certainly, an occupational status, title, that people will take their words so far that they'll do things to contradict their own morals, and they'll be influenced in areas beyond the person's expertise, like a doctor influencing you in your relationships or something that's totally irrelevant. And so we take it a little bit too far. And in the case of Moscow and Latah County, it's a really small community, right? And so the authority figures are often going to be people who are known and well trusted. And, so that makes this effect even potentially more problematic. And as you know, Chief Fry, the chief of the police at the time, had said that he was certain that he arrested the right suspect and he didn't have any doubts. And so the community would say, okay, well, the chief of police is sure, so then I can be sure too. But like I said, we can't assume, and there's no trial that had taken place yet. And so we can't assume that that's accurate information, but we tend to take that a little bit too much at face value.
The example that you gave of the police chief speaking out and offering what he thinks about a case, does that Is that something that creates more bias in the minds of the Lake Tahoe County residents that heard that?
Yeah, I mean, they're familiar with him. They know him to be an authority figure. They may know him personally or trust him personally. And so, yeah, somebody outside of Lake Tahoe County, they'll still be affected by his authority status, but maybe not as much, right? And then he also has power over people in that community, and that seems to carry some weight when it comes to this type of influence. And then also, the president of University of Idaho saying, we can feel safe now, they found the person. It sounds very conclusive when there hadn't been a trial yet. And so another authority figure is pretty major in an area like Lake Tahoe because so much is centered around the university.
Are there other ways that you found that create bias?
Yes, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide. This is the phenomenon that goes back maybe a century. We've been studying this in so many different contexts, tons and tons of research on this phenomenon called classical conditioning. And it's basically when we make associations between things and it causes us to have reactions that we didn't have before. Like, for example, if your alarm clock, we don't really have alarm clocks that much anymore, but if your alarm sound on your phone, if that's what you use, wakes you up this morning and you have kind of a negative response to it, it might be because you associated it with waking up before you wanted to. Before, I know I always try to choose a sound that I don't have an aversion to, but then it doesn't take long before I have a negative reaction. So you make this connection, right? But if that same tone was used every time a loved one texted me, then I wouldn't develop an aversion. I might develop a favorable reaction. So classical conditioning is when we develop a response to a stimulus. It could be a sound, it could be any stimulus at all, including a person, because we've connected them with something that it has been paired with, especially repeated pairings. So in this particular case, if the defendant's name is seen throughout media and social media a lot, or his image is shown alongside things that are aversive, negative words, things like terror, murder, evil, or
So they're not giving individuals very much credit as far as I'm concerned. They're basically saying that we're all dumbasses and we cannot figure this out on our own, that we're all going to follow everything we read. Well, no, we're smarter than all that. We can figure out in our own minds, sift through the shite and figure this out. This is just, in my opinion, they're trying to confuse everybody out there. Nothing else. There cannot be another reason for all this blah, blah, blah.
Or alongside known killers, alongside details of the murder, alongside information about, tragic consequences, things that make us feel bad. What happens is it doesn't take that many pairings, and then his name alone, which was once neutral, because most people wouldn't have known him, becomes conditioned, and it evokes those same kinds of feelings. And they've done studies like this where they can make this happen within minutes. If I could take a picture of any of you or multiple pictures of any of you, show those interspersed with pictures of other people, and at the same time present words, consciously or not consciously, that say things like terror and evil. And at the end of the study, I can ask people, what do you think of this person? And the rating will be lower. And so if you get that exposure a lot, like in Lake Tahoe, where people are getting a lot of media exposure and also social media exposure and having a lot of discussions and attending, vigils, and they're really being exposed to kind of all these emotional reactions. If they're thinking about him at the same time, they can't help but make that connection, even if they don't think he's guilty.
Yeah, I agree.
Let me make sure I understand how big this is, how far-reaching this is.
Ruthie.
We've been with this case pending for 1.5 years, and there's been, suffice to say, a lot of media coverage.
No.
There's a lot of pictures of Mr. Kohberger in the media. Do you mean that when we walk into trial in the rooms full of potential jurors, there's going to be a great majority of them that before we sit down are going to have a feeling of bias against Mr. Kohberger?
Yeah, I do. And you've seen the pictures, these ominous headlines. That connection can't help but be made.
Oh, give me a break.
That's all the way that bias gets created? Or do you have another one?
I have one more. As far as things that happen largely while the publicity is coming in and you're getting exposed to it. And it's sort of a category of a lot of different influences that are emotional and motivational. And this one I think is especially relevant to, sourcing people out of Lake County to be jurors. So the media played a role in inducing some emotions like it does. It likes to attract attention, things like fear and anger and sympathy and empathy. But in that community, people are going to have those emotions anyway from everything that's going on. But if the media uses phrases like killer on the loose, everybody stay vigilant, make sure you report all suspicious activity, then they're arousing that even more. And so what happens is when we have emotions like that, they filter in how we process information. Just like when you're angry, you're more likely to remember things that have made you angry in the past than things that have made you happy. And when you're angry, you're also more likely to have kind of an agenda with new information coming in. And so, for example, and this is something that could stay with somebody, this distorted information processing could stay with somebody and could get, there could be a resurgence during a trial where it keeps affecting somebody as they are reminded of their emotions. Because, they've associated moods with different judgments of guilt. Like, for example, if you're angrier, you tend to be more punitive and you want retribution. And in fact, in one study, they associated anger of mock jurors during a trial with support for imposing a death sentence for somebody. And they, when they were angry, they were less likely to pay attention to defense arguments. So people aren't trying to be biased. It's just that when we're in moods, those moods filter how we process information, how we take it in. And, I think I may have mentioned this already, but there's also kind of an emotional, motivational component to feel like the person who committed the crime is under arrest. It is the right person. I think I mentioned it as, being a motivation by the police, but the community has this motivation too in Lake Tahoe because they were living in fear during all these weeks where they were trying to find somebody to arrest. And somebody was arrested and people could take a sigh of relief. But that sigh of relief assumes that he's guilty. And so we have this coping mechanism, basically, where we want to get rid of these negative emotions. And one way to do that is to feel like, oh, well, if he committed a crime and he's under arrest, then I can feel safe now. And so that's something that could come into play too if you live within the region where the event occurred.
And that's because of the fear that was associated with
any of the emotions really could potentially distort information processing. That last point relevant to fear, but a lot of research on how anger influences judgments and how sympathy for victims, empathy for victims influences judgments. And certainly if you are in Lake Tahoe and attended vigils or offered social support, that you're really getting a lot of that empathy and sympathy as well, or if you're exposed to the personal media stories about what happened.
So I think I understand the ways that the human bias just gets bigger and more solid in the person. What happens if we seat a Lake Tahoe County jury and those biases are there? What happens as we put on the trial and evidence is presented?
Yeah, well, I mentioned this one can get carried through the trial, this idea of motivational and emotional sources. But there are other things that can happen during trial too that kind of exacerbate the problem. And one of these is confirmation bias. So this has to do with us wanting to confirm our expectations of things. And one of the most fundamental human needs we have is a need for predictability. You don't want to walk into this courtroom and feel like you have no idea what's going to happen. That's uncomfortable. We want to feel like we know what's going to happen. And we know how people are going to behave. And so part of this need for predictability is that it causes us to distort reality a little bit. And so in one way that this does this is through the confirmation bias, which is once we develop an expectation of something, once we decide that this is true, this is the case, or the defendant is guilty or not guilty, or the defendant lives a certain lifestyle or behaves a certain way, or then once we decide something, everything goes through that filter. So I talked about an emotional filter. This is a cognitive filter that we actually process information differently based on what we expect to see and hear. It's just like if, you're going to meet up with a friend and you think somebody called your name, you expected it. And so it made you hear it even when it didn't happen. And if somebody does call your name, you hear it more readily. So we're kind of tuned in. And so the processes I mentioned here, this filtering can happen via 3 different processes. One is selective attention. So if I'm a juror and I have expectations about Mr. Kohberger, it doesn't have to be just that he's guilty, but it could be expectations about him as a person. If I have expectations coming in and I'm getting all this new evidence during trial, going through that filter and paying attention to information that backs up my idea. Well, I had this idea that he's a bad guy, and this information backs that up, so I pay extra attention to that. And then they talked about something where, where he was kind to someone, and I really have to pay much attention to it. So, we have this filter, and then we process information too in a distorted manner. We actually will change the information to fit in with what we think. It's just a way of our minds simplifying our worlds. And while these processes all help us not be overloaded cognitively, they distort what we take in. So we have to be aware of them. And recall is distorted as well. So, a trial takes place over a long period of time, potentially, and somebody has to remember a lot of information. And if they have distorted recall that's consistent with their expectations before coming in, that's obviously problematic.
Is that the only thing that happens when we have new information at trial?
No, I have a couple other things that I'd like to talk about. And the first one is belief perseverance, which is really a direct consequence of the confirmation bias. So it's just like it sounds. This is the tendency for our beliefs to persevere, even in the face of contradictory evidence. Confirmation bias supplies us with this filter. And because we have this filter, if somebody gives us all these facts that go against what we think, logically, we should just change our minds. A lot of the time we don't. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that sometimes we even cling more closely to our beliefs. And anyone who's looked at anything on social media has probably seen evidence of this, where somebody has a strong belief about something and then somebody provides actual facts that contradict it. And then instead of saying, oh, you're right, I see your point. Of course, that can happen sometimes. The general tendency is for people to still stick with their beliefs anyway because they formed them. When you're in the process of forming your beliefs, that's different. But once you form something, it tends to stick. It's the same thing with stereotypes. Somebody has an assumption that elderly people are bad drivers, and they see a whole bunch of evidence suggesting otherwise, and even research studies and things like that. Then they no, I still think elderly people are bad drivers. So that's belief perseverance. And in some cases, people will even double down. Again, social media, they might even get more aggressively in line with their initial opinion after seeing evidence to the contrary. So this is one reason it's directly aligned with confirmation bias.
It sounds like they can work together when somebody already has a bias. They've already made decisions about it.
Yeah, really any expectation or decision or judgment, even if you don't know that you have it. I heard the phrase of growing legs. Well, there's a famous social influence researcher who used that same phrase with decision making. Like once you've decided something, your decision grows legs of its own. And so now it's not just the normal information necessary that for any rational person, because we all kind of have this tendency to be irrational in situations like this, but it ends up causing us to distort reality a little bit, and we need a lot more evidence now than we should to change our minds.
What else impacts getting new information during the course of the trial?
We'll advance to the next slide. I want to mention a little bit about cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is an uncomfortable feeling we have when we have like an inner clash, like an inner hypocrisy, like if I'm religious, but I don't adhere to one thing about my religion, and then there's this inner clash, and we don't like that feeling, and we like to reduce it, minimize it, prevent it. So why is that relevant here? Well, if somebody lives in Latah County, they might have a dissonance experience because if they start during trial to believe that, oh, maybe the defendant is innocent, maybe he shouldn't be convicted, that belief might be battling another belief about loyalty to their community because they know the community wants closure. They know that the community wants him to be guilty. They know the community wants to feel safe. And so they have this inner clash. And what happens when we have this inner clash, lots of things can happen. But one thing that could happen is we could distort reality. That's another reason for kind of being a little bit less accurate when taking in information. So if I'm if I'm a juror from Lake Tahoe County, and I'm starting to kind of think, oh, maybe he didn't do it. There might be part of my brain convincing me that no, he's guilty because of this inner clash. I want to get rid of the clash.
Is that because of the loyalty a person would feel to Lake Tahoe County, to their community?
I think that's a big part of it. And there could be other reasons with regard to community connections that could create that clash too.
Like a concern that they might be known
Yeah.
who they are as a juror?
A concern that they might be known. They're just kind of picturing yourself sort of coming back to your community with the news that you were involved in a process that actually, acquitted somebody, for example, and having to face people in your community, which is something I touch on later a little bit too.
All right. Shall we move forward?
Yeah.
All right. I know the court's going to want to know, can we fix this?
Sure.
Can we get our jurors in here and tell them, don't bring your bias in? Can we fix this? What do you think, knowing what you know about human bias?
I would love that to be the case. I just don't see that as feasible when bringing jurors out of Lake Tahoe County. And I can tell you some problems with all the methods that people try to use. It's just, if you look at the research, there are limitations to these. And so one of them, of course, is juror selection. Let's try to find people, for example, who haven't been exposed to publicity. So there are problems with that. Can you recount all of the publicity that you've been exposed to? No. If I asked you to tell me about all of the interactions you had with people over the course of a week, you're going to have forgotten some, right? But doesn't mean they're not going to be affecting you. So maybe when I was at the grocery store, the person checking me out had a negative expression on their face, and I didn't recount that to you, but maybe that memory is there and it's buried. And when I go back in the grocery store, I'm a little colder to them. And another possibility too is that retrieval cues can make some of these unconscious memories actually become conscious, and maybe they affect us at that level. So if I'm a juror and I'm sitting in and hearing all of this evidence, something might remind me, oh yeah, and I remember they found this information, and maybe it's something that's not admissible, but now it's affecting me. And I didn't report that I knew that because I didn't remember that I knew it until something cued that up. And so that's a retrieval cue, is basically something that reminds you of what you know and can't articulate yet, or maybe don't have knowledge about it at a conscious level. And so there's a problem with that, picking people who haven't been as exposed to a case. And of course, in Lake Tahoe, we talked about the saturation of media. It'd be hard to find somebody to even say that, but if they say that, I don't know if that really would be something we could rely on as being totally correct. And then this is something I focus a lot of my research on, and it's bias. So there's a lot of research on how we overestimate ourselves. We have overconfidence. We tend to rate ourselves as better than average, like better than average in intelligence. There's one study where the vast majority of people rated themselves as better than average drivers, but we can't all be better than average. It included people who had gotten into multiple car accidents. So while people might be thinking that they're making an accurate assessment of themselves, when they're asked, hey, do you have any bias, for or against the defendant? Do you have any, or are you capable of setting aside your bias? People probably often believe that they can set that bias aside. Because it's in line with all of this research that we know about how we tend to overestimate ourselves. So they're going to say they're less biased than they are. That's been shown over and over again in a lot of studies. And by the way, the people who are the most biased have the most distortion when they're estimating their bias in at least some cases that they've studied so far. That's some research I've done too. And then also they're going to be biased about how much bias they have. That's called the bias blind spot, which has been studied too. So I might acknowledge that other people might be biased, but I won't be biased, and then I'll be capable of setting it aside. So that's one process, jury selection that we would hope would work, but there are a lot of drawbacks to it. So I wouldn't rely on that.
Do you think that it's less likely to work in a situation like this with the amount of negative media coverage that has been going on for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask somebody from Latah County to forget everything that they've heard about the case, forget all the discussions they've had, forget all of the media they've been exposed to, forget all the emotions that they've experienced, set all that aside. I mean, can you really do that? Can you unfear things and unfeel things for an extended period of time to be objective? That's quite an undertaking. So yeah, I think that's problematic.
You mentioned extended period of time. This trial is projected to take 3 full months. Is that what you mean by extended period of time?
Yeah, really. The longer it is, the more potentially distortion there can be because your decision has grown legs and things are getting filtered through filters. And then emotional things can carry a little bit more longevity. So I wouldn't expect it to just go away if it's a long trial by any means, but I'd expect to see it in a short or long.
Is there anything else that can be attempted that might or might not work?
Yeah, my next slide is on instructions. You know what? And of course, people would want to try to give instructions to jurors to be unbiased. And like I said, people overestimate their ability to do this. They don't even think they're that biased to begin with. And the first step to not being influenced by bias is to acknowledge that you have bias. So there's already an obstacle there. And then you have to have the motivation to not be biased. And I hope jurors have that. You also have to have the cognitive capacity to be unbiased. And that's where we run into a lot of problems because their cognitive capacity is going to be occupied by serving as a juror, paying attention to information. They don't have time to spend 80% of their mind, trying not to be biased and catching all the bias. And in fact, there's research that suggests that when we try to suppress thoughts, that we can think about them even more as soon as we let our guard down, which is very soon because you have to think about other things at some point. So if I try not to think about something like an argument I had with somebody or somebody tries not to think about cigarettes, but they're trying to quit smoking, they could do that for a really short amount of time. But as soon as they think about something else, their mind gets flooded with those thoughts. Because in order for you to not think about something, you have to think about it so that you can catch those thoughts. And that process is automatic. Now, most of what I've been talking about today is unconscious, automatic processing, and that's why it's so hard to control. And with regard to instructions to disregard information, whether it's something that people learned pre-trial or something they learned during trial that turns out to be inadmissible, the research shows that those instructions typically don't work, and sometimes they can backfire, partly because of this thought suppression rebound effect. And then there could be other reasons too, like people not wanting to be told how to think. And I mentioned too that, it applies to emotional information too. So factual and emotional pretrial publicity would still have influence even if people say, don't let this affect you. I wouldn't assume that works at all, unfortunately.
How about jury deliberation? Will that work if you have a juror in there who's going to maybe accidentally bring something in or interpret something based on something they heard before, or they've remembered something over the course of trial? Will the other jurors push it out, help them not to think about that? Will the group overcome that bias?
Yeah, so we would hope that you get a bunch of people together who are trying to be objective for them to sort of correct each other. And while some of that might happen, what the research has shown is that if some people are exposed to pretrial publicity and some aren't, that can spread. Because you can't expect a juror to remember where they learned things. Like maybe they have information about DNA evidence and some of it came from trial and some of it didn't. And how do you disentangle that? That's really, really hard to do. And so they might spread it unintentionally. It might be spread intentionally too. But even if we're assuming perfect jurors here, it might spread unintentionally and then sort of contaminate the jurors during discussions. And then there's also this phenomenon we've been studying for a long time called group polarization, which is when you get a group of people and if they're leaning towards a particular opinion, when they discuss a topic, that opinion gets stronger and stronger the more they discuss it. Another thing you could see potentially on social media, like groups that, are invested in a particular issue. And so if the group is leaning towards negative judgments about Mr. Kohberger or judgments of guilt or anything, even a little bit, then discussions could actually make it worse and worse over time. It could get polarized. So I don't anticipate that discussions would fix the problem. In fact, I would expect it to exacerbate the problem. And that might be why in that meta-analysis I talked about, the effect of pretrial publicity was stronger when it came to group judgments, verdicts versus individual judgments of guilt.
Based on your years of teaching human bias and your extensive study of human bias, do you have an opinion about whether the extensive pretrial publicity has impacted the Latah County jury pool?
I do. I think it would be so hard to be a member of that community and be able to come in and be objective, arguably impossible. So we don't have a known method for undoing things, and the things have been done. They've felt the emotions, they've seen the publicity, they've had the discussions, they've been to the vigils, and even if they want to be as objective as possible, and even if we disregard some of the limitations I talked about before, research has not uncovered a way to undo this after it's there. And so the recommended best practice by the vast majority of researchers on this topic is find people who don't have that information, restrict that information in the first place, find people who don't have that information. And the same goes for that emotional experience and investment and so on. Utilize jurors who've had less exposure, they have less reason for prejudgment, less motivation to find the defendant guilty. It doesn't affect them, their feelings of safety, the community. They don't have to worry about reporting back, other people maybe ostracizing them if they didn't make the judgment that was expected or wanted. And so my recommendation would be to find a community to recruit jurors from that's as far removed from Latah as possible, physically and psychologically.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions for you, but if you hold on just a minute, I think Ms. Katie might. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Ms. Beatty.
Your Honor.
In any jurisdiction where there's been a tremendous amount of pretrial publicity, at least some of these biases would apply to a prospective jury pool, correct?
Yeah.
And the best thing, if I'm understanding your testimony correctly, for this trial would be to have a jury pool with the largest percentage of jurors who hadn't formed an opinion on this case already. Would that be fair to say?
I can't speak to percentages. You need somehow to find enough people to serve on the jury who have not been exposed. Now, this is a high profile case, so we know the exposure is all over the state, and of course this is part of it. But if you can have less exposure, you have less bias potential.
In a case like this, where there's been so much exposure across all counties, are there unique challenges in selecting a jury that would apply anywhere?
So, I mentioned some unique things about Latah County and emotional investment in the community, concern for community members, and having felt that fear and wanting the defendant to be guilty so that they could resolve the fear and anger. So there are all those emotional and social connections, and of course, Dr. Edelman's report, which will come up later, shows that a lot of people who live in Latah County are connected in some way to the university or the police involved in the case. So they actually, know people or they lived in Latah County. And so those kinds of things make, because it's such a small community, make Latah a unique experience.
And so you've reviewed Dr. Edelman's survey.
I have.
So does it sound correct that 75% of folks in Latah County are not affiliated with the university?
I don't recall his percentages.
Okay.
So offhand, I would have to see the report. I could look at it if you'd like.
Okay. And I should be more precise. I believe the question was, are you or a family member a student or employee at the University of Idaho in Moscow? And the percentage of folks who responded no was 75%. Does that sound right?
I couldn't tell you without seeing it. Sorry, I don't remember.
Would it surprise you to find out that 60% of Latah County residents who were surveyed reported that they did not feel higher levels of stress or anxiety during the hunt for the killer in this case?
I don't know. I don't know what percentage I would have estimated. I just would have estimated it to be higher in Latah.
So is one strategy that the court could use in any jurisdiction, whether the trial stays in Latah County or moves to Ada County, would bringing in a larger jury pool alleviate some of these concerns across any jurisdiction?
Well, if we're talking about Latah County, a lot of the things that I mentioned were not in the survey. So, there are emotions I mentioned that weren't assessed during the survey, impressions of Mr. Kohberger that weren't in the survey. So it could be that 90% of people think he's a bad guy, but they don't think he's guilty. And then that still could influence judgments. So it's really hard to answer that question without, I didn't make the survey. And even if I did, there'd be a lot of things that I would miss too, so I can't make that determination. About, you said maybe you can restate it and I can.
No, I appreciate that answer. Thank you. Now, I guess the last question I'll ask you is, would you be surprised to find out that in the survey, when jurors were asked, potential jurors who were responding to the survey were asked what their opinion is of Bryan Kohberger, the highest percentage of prospective jurors that were surveyed who had no opinion of Mr. Kohberger were Latah County survey respondents? Would that surprise you?
That they have no opinion about whether he is guilty.
I think the question is just, do you have an opinion of Mr. Kohberger?
Well, it's a high profile case that had a lot of coverage and the percentages are so high that of people who have an opinion. I imagine, I don't have those in front of me, but in statistics, we call that a ceiling effect when all the percentages are high and you can't really see differences. So I don't know if we're talking, I don't know what numbers you're looking at, but I don't know if that applies or not in this particular case.
Thank you. I have further questions.
Ms. J. Ms. Taylor? Anything else?
Yes, just a few questions for you. Your focus is on human bias, right? Okay. And you talked to us about media exposure and how that forms bias. Are bias and forming an opinion, you're willing to say, different things?
Bias can come from lots of things, one of which is an opinion that was formed, and then bias can shape another opinion that gets formed, if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. You talked to us a little bit earlier about how that bias gets formed, and then you told us sometimes we won't be able to spit out our entire bias or what we looked at to form bias. Is there a danger in a case like this, where there's been a lot of media coverage, that somehow we seek a jury, but they start remembering things they read in the paper and trying to make the evidence fit into that filter?
Oh yeah, of course. So Dr. Edelman's report, I remember, said that people didn't list everything that they recalled, but when they were prompted to ask about to indicate whether they remembered specific things, then they remembered a whole bunch of things. And the same thing would happen during a trial, right? Those retrieval cues, anything that reminds you of something. So our minds have kind of an association network. All of our memories are sort of connected in some way. You could just mention the word white, and maybe I think of snow. So our memories can come up from so many things that I would be surprised if there weren't some memories rekindled.
Thank you. That's it for me.
Thanks, Ms. Taylor. Any more questions?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you. May this witness be excused?
She makes.
All right. And no objection to that.
No,
All right.
you're
Okay. Thank you. You're free to stay. You're free to stay or leave. All right. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Thank you. Okay, next witness.
Next witness is Dr. Bryan Edelman.
Okay. Dr. Edelman. All right, welcome back. Please raise your right hand.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury.
I do.
All right, sir, please have a seat and then please state your name and spell your last.
I'm going to speak slow today, I promise. It's Bryan Edelman, EZELMAN.
Sir, go ahead, stay with.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Edelman, I see that you brought some things to council table with you.
I did.
What do you have?
It's just a copy of my presentation.
Your PowerPoint presentation? Okay. And is that face down? Perfect. Will you let me know if you need to flip it over to refresh your memory?
I can tell you the second you start, I won't be able to see anything, so I'm going to need it.
Okay. Your Honor and counsel, then I'll ask if he can leave his PowerPoint presentation face up so he can help us understand this testimony. No objection to that.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
All right, let's start with your background.
Going back how far? I'm a child.
Well, let's start with what you do right now and then work backwards and forward. How about that?
Okay. I'm a trial consultant. So in that capacity, I'm often in the courtroom doing jury selections and assisting with that, running juror questionnaires, helping attorneys craft oral voir dire questions. And I also do pretrial research. So that's focus groups and mock trials. And then I also do post-trial interviews. And do a lot of presentations and writing in terms of trying to educate or help the legal community. And then I also serve as an expert witness in this capacity. And in that scenario, I'm often focusing on pretrial publicity, the impact of pretrial publicity, and whether or not a defendant's due process rights may have been undermined by media coverage. And I also do post-conviction work, which kind of ties into that, where I might be brought in to look at a case to see if there was a lot of media coverage and whether or not there should have been a change of venue or a request for a change of venue, and looking at the adequacy of voir dire to uncover what jurors knew. So that's kind of reviewing the voir dire transcripts and use of challenges, that sort of thing.
How long have you been doing that work?
That part? Since I think the first one, maybe like 2011, 2012, something like that.
Where do you do that work? What company?
So all over the place. So all over the country in state and federal cases, in Florida, Michigan, Washington, DC, Idaho, California, Texas, New York, a bunch of others. So quite a bit.
How were you educated to do the work that you
So I have a background in social psychology. So a PhD in social psychology from the University of Nevada, Reno, which is a program that really focused on psychology and law. That's where the judicial college is, and something called the Grant Sawyer Center for Justice Studies. Am I going slow, or I do it better? Okay. And while there, I worked at the Grant Sawyer Center for Justice Studies as well, and did research on the death penalty, so on pretrial release programs, and the impact of media coverage. So kind of similar to this. And when I finished that, I went to England and got an LLM in international humanitarian law, and then came back here and started working at a trial consulting firm. I think I started in 2000, I want to say 2004. That sounds about right. 2000, I think. And then started my own or co-founded Trial Innovations, where I am now, with a business partner in 2011.
do you do any teaching about your
Teaching? So I do like CLE classes and things like that for bar associations. I've done it for public defenders, for district attorneys' offices. I've been like a visiting lecturer at like different law schools, at the ASTC, which is the American Society of Trial Consultants. Did classes on like trial consulting and change of venue. I think I've done one at APLS, which is like the American Psychology Association, a legal society. And I'm sure there's some others out there too. ABOTA is one, and that might be more on like jury selection. That's like a legal organization.
Are you a member of any organizations, professional organizations specific to your work?
Currently, I don't think I normally I'm a member of ASTC, which is American Society of Trial Consultants, but I might have forgot to pay my dues this year, so maybe not.
Are you usually a member of that organization?
And same with APLS. That's one.
What APLS again?
That's the American Psychology Association, and it's the Legal Society division. And then I also do for like the ASTC. I've been on like a committee that helps write some of the professional guidelines, particularly around change of venue.
And I understand you do consultant work. Do you testify as an expert?
Yes.
What states?
What states?
Roughly.
Okay. Kind of the ones I mentioned earlier. I'm sure there's more. So, Florida, Michigan, California, Washington State, Washington, D.C., Texas, Idaho. Wish I had a map in front of me right now. Tennessee, Georgia, Minnesota, and I'm sure there's others, but it's been a long time, so I've done a bunch of them. I've probably done over 100 that I've been retained on for in some capacity related to pretrial publicity in both state and federal cases.
I heard you mention Idaho. You testified as an expert in Idaho, is that right?
I have.
How about in this case? Have you testified before in this case?
In this case, yes. I did.
All right.
Yes.
Last time we were here, we were talking about a survey that was in progress.
Yes.
So have you now completed your survey?
Yes. So I completed the survey in Latah County and then conducted several comparison surveys after that hearing in Ada County, Bannock County, and Canyon County.
Before we get to all of those, I'm going to start a PowerPoint presentation that you've provided for us today, so you can walk me through the process of what you do and how that works. Give me just one moment.
Sure. I'm going to flip this over then.
Thank you for that, for the patience. I think we have it now. Will you give us a or an overview of what we're going to talk about today?
Yes. So the presentation is broken down into 3 parts. So the first part is just kind of a cursory review of some of the social science research, some of the basic general research, foundational research, and then research specific to pretrial publicity and juror decision-making. And then to get into the actual change of venue analysis, which focuses on the media coverage, so the extent and nature of the coverage, and in addition to whether or not that coverage has had any impact on the jury pool. So that really gets into the survey. And the last part gets into the unique challenges that cases like this pose when we talk about jury selection. So is what here an effective remedy in cases like this, when there's been a lot of media coverage and people have a lot of knowledge about the case.
I heard you say cases like this. What do you mean?
Sorry, when I say what?
Cases like this.
Oh, cases that have a lot of media coverage. So in a normal case, like a car accident or something like that, people come in, they might have general attitudes about drinking and driving, but they don't have case-specific attitudes about this person that are well-developed from information I know about the evidence in the person and so on. When you have a case like this, people come into the courtroom with case-specific attitudes that are well-developed and based on, it could be emotional information, it could be evidence that they already have read, seen, or heard. So they have very well-developed attitudes. So that's a unique thing because they're no longer blank slates when they're hearing evidence. They're confirming what they already know. as opposed to jurors who don't know anything and are learning and building attitudes and knowledge structures as they go.
All right, let's go to the background of why we do this, why this matters.
Yeah, so there's decades of research in general documenting the impact of pretrial publicity on decision making, and it kind of falls into two areas. So there's what we call field research, which is kind of similar to like a change of venue survey. So people are exposed to pretrial publicity in a naturally occurring setting. I read a newspaper, I watch it on the news or on the news when I'm cooking dinner, whatever it may be. And so we see natural exposure and we're able to assess the impact of that coverage on pretrial opinions. But there's some limitations to that. We can't really learn how pretrial publicity impacts decisions, and we can't really learn the types of pretrial publicity that are most impactful, and whether or not remedial measures like an admonition or voir dire mitigate the impact it has. That's where experimental research comes in, because it's a controlled setting and we can test things like what types of pretrial publicity are most prejudicial, how does pretrial publicity impact decisions, and things like do remedies work, and so on.
Do you have an example to help me understand maybe the difference starting with field research?
Sure. So the one we're looking at here is one of the earlier pieces that was published, and it looked at 3 cases that were high-profile cases in California. One involved the murder of 2 police officers, I think it was in Yolo County, and then the murder of a dental hygienist from a prominent family. So it was the status of the victim was important in that. And then I believe the third one was a rape of a young girl. So the 3 cases, and they did surveys to assess the impact of that media coverage. And they learned a couple of interesting things. So they learned that people who consume news, whether they watch it on the news or they read the local paper, develop more case knowledge. So the more often I follow the news, the more likely I'm to have detailed information about that specific case. So there's the first relationship that we look at. And then the next thing is case knowledge impacts presumption of guilt. So people who have well-developed case knowledge, they've read a lot about it and they know a lot of detail, they're more likely to think the defendant is guilty. They're more likely to have an opinion about that. And that stands out as more important than a host of things. They looked at gender, education, attitudes towards the criminal justice system, and ultimately case knowledge was 10 times more impactful, more important than attitudes like towards the criminal justice system. So it wasn't something like I'm just a pro-conviction person who tends to favor the government and think people are guilty. It was far more important than that when it came to these attitudes and opinions they developed.
It sounds like the field research has been important in your profession.
Yes.
Fair to say?
Yeah.
Help me understand what experimental research is.
Yeah, so these are more, again, traditional studies where we are able to control. We can look to see, maybe we're testing to see what types of pretrial publicity are most impactful. Maybe we want to know if voir dire is an effective remedy at mitigating the influence or impact. An interesting study someone recently did was looking at the set-aside question. And they were looking to see if you did something like normally what happens to jurors on the spot. It's just like, what do you know about the case? And it's kind of like on the spot, I need to think about it and try to recall everything from memory and spout it out right there. So the remedy was, what if the person was given time to write down everything they know and think about it, think, can they really be fair, and then come back to them and then ask them again. So they were looking at that as a remedy. So that would be an example of an experiment. And like globally, what we find is exposure to pretrial publicity impacts perceptions of guilt, and it influences the defendant's credibility, likability, and sympathy towards the defendant as well. And overall, most of the research shows that judicial remedies are not effective. We talk about admonitions, so like the judge telling the jurors are not allowed to consider media coverage; they have to set that aside. Voir dire, kind of like I was mentioning before, those don't mitigate the impact of media coverage. Delay is another one. Sometimes there's a long delay between when someone reads the coverage and when they come and do the experiment to see if that mitigates the impact. So overall, those are the key findings and takeaways from the experimental research.
All right. You have a slide in here called, I'm not saying this word correctly, Potower and Singer. What's this about? How is this important?
So this is, again, just an example of some of the research. So in this study, the researchers recruited people who had been excused for jury duty, so they were at the courthouse, and they were put into 2 different conditions. So in one condition, the experimental condition, they read an article, and that article contained information about the defendant. It was a criminal record, and it also included a retracted confession. So they were looking at something that was inadmissible. It wasn't going to come in the story. And the control group read the same article absent those 2 pieces. Didn't mention anything about the criminal past, criminal record, or the retracted confession. And what they found, if you go to the next slide, is that there was a significant effect. So those participants who were in the experimental condition, the ones who had been exposed to the background, the criminal background information and the retracted confession, were much more likely, I can tell I'm talking too fast, were much more likely to convict and perceive the defendant as guilty compared to the control group. So that was a significant effect.
That seems like a pretty high percentage. This is an experiment with 2 otherwise equal groups of people, some exposed to negative publicity and some not, and almost 30% of the people in that experimental group would have voted to convict just based on that difference alone.
So 28 percentage points higher. And again, it's a controlled study. So they're controlling for everything. So the only variable really that should be, that's impacting is the fact that one group heard this negative prejudicial information, the other one didn't.
Seems like a high.
What's that?
That seems like a high amount.
Well, it's a significant find. It's statistically significant.
All right. Let's talk about pretrial publicity.
Okay.
How does it impact information that you might get in trouble?
Yeah, so we already heard about this a bit in terms of this selective process for filtering information. So the one that really is significant for me that stands out is the belief perseverance research. I'll tell you why. And like it was mentioned, so a common study would be someone would read an essay. For example, there might be an article about why risk-taking makes you a good firefighter, and people who are cautious that's not a good characteristic. And then someone else might read the exact opposite, where implying that cautious people are better firefighters than risk takers. And then they're asked to write an essay, and whichever one they read, they're more likely to write to support or write an essay that's consistent with what they read. And then later, when they're confronted with information that disconfirms whatever they had read and written, they're resistant to change. So we see that in our everyday lives quite a bit. And the thing that really is significant to think about is jurors who come in as a blank slate in a normal case, who haven't been exposed to media coverage, have no opinions or attitudes that are specific about the defendant, about the evidence, about guilt. And they're just processing evidence in a controlled setting through direct examination and cross-examination. The rules of evidence apply. So they're learning and they're developing opinions. They're considering the evidence for the first time. That's the ideal situation. In a high-profile case where jurors have been exposed to a lot of coverage and they end up serving, they already have well-developed attitudes about the defendant. And so opinions of the defendant. They have well-developed attitudes about guilt, for example. And they have case knowledge that they've already been exposed to, not in a controlled setting. So maybe it's information in this case about cell tower data, or information about a vehicle being seen on video, or what the results of DNA tests are. And it's not under a controlled setting of direct examination and cross-examination, another expert from the defense side where they weigh all that. It's in the context of a news story. There's editorial, there's public personalities, it's Nancy Grace, there's all this sensationalism around it. So they're being exposed to all that, but they're also getting the information, the evidence within that context that they're going to hear at trial. So when they hear that information, it's not new, and they're not
Thank you guys very much. I'm sorry to have to do this to you, but family emergency and I got to travel. So I love you guys and I'll see you soon in the next one. Bye for now. Okay. Hang on. Hang on. Bye for now.